Hello, I'm Daniel Sorensen. The project you're about to see was created on location at the Pacific Design Center in West Hollywood. The client, Moura Starr, was creating a new catalog and wanted imagery that would present the furniture and accessories in the best light possible. They have a very upscale, sophisticated clientele, and it needed to appeal to them. It needed to be emotional, glamorous, and very high fashion. I immediately came up with the idea of using city lights as a background and went online to see what I could find. I did find some good shots, discussed it with the client, and decided that's the way we would go. Having decided that the city lights is the way I wanted to go, the first thing I wanted to do was actually try the lights in my composition to see if they were really going to work, if I really felt it was going to give me the look and feel that I was after. You know, that sense of high fashion and glamour. First thing I did was I created a path around the back of the sofa and the back wall. Then I brought the city lights in. Put them in about where I wanted them. Loaded the path as a selection and added a layer mask. So I thought that looked pretty good, except the lights are too bright. The city's too bright. I know the sofas are going to eventually have to be white. They are white in reality, but the incandescent lights in the showroom tended to make them look very yellow and kind of dull. And I didn't want the background to be competing with the sofa. So I duplicated the lights, Command J, put the upper layer on multiply. It got a little bit too dark, so I lowered the opacity to about 83. Then I added the levels, used the previous layer as a clipping mask, and increased the contrast some more. So then the next thing I wanted to do was get those sofas looking white. I created a new group for the sofa, and using a combination of the clone stamp tool and the patch tool, I eliminated the shadows across the front of the sofa. Now, in the interest of time, I won't recreate each layer for you, but I'll just turn them on so that you can see the results. These two layers eliminated the shadow across the bottom of the cushion. I needed to use an adjustment layer to lighten it up. Then I've got a whole group here of clone and or patch tool that gets rid of some more shadows. This group here gets rid of the shadows on this. I need to get rid of the yellow, so I added a levels adjustment layer and went into the individual channels to do the color correction. In this case, I wanted to go into the blue channel primarily in order to get rid of the yellow. So if you go into the blue channel, one direction is going to go yellow, the other direction is going to go blue. So I had to move it towards the blue and out of the yellow in order to make it appear white. There was a shadow or a reflection across the top of the cushions, so I needed a second adjustment layer to get rid of that. Now, as I was doing this, I noticed on the table, in the glass, there's a reflection of the wallpaper, and that's going to have to go. In addition to getting rid of the reflection of the wallpaper in the glass, I decided I wanted to get rid of the end of these dowel plugs or whatever they are on the table. We've got quite a few of them, and I wanted to highlight this leg. In order to match the look of the wood grain, I decided to just paint all of these. And so that's what all these layers are. These are just basically paint layers removing or hiding the plugs. That's what most of these are. This one is paint on this glass to remove the reflection. So I basically did a selection of the glass and then just painted with a paintbrush, sampling constantly. So with the paintbrush, if you hold down the Option key, you can sample. So I could sample like here and then paint in here. And the color of the wood through the glass had to be slightly darker than the actual table because it is going through the green glass. I decided to get rid of this reflection, which is from this light. And that's what this one does. And if we look at these individually, you can see what these paint layers look like. This one is to give the impression of the wood grain. And then here are some additional touch-up layers. One issue with painting so much is that the paint removes all of the texture. So the paint ends up looking very smooth, and it looks like an illustration and no longer like a photograph. One way to deal with that is to add a layer of noise. So that's what this layer is here. And if you can see, it's adding noise, which tends to make it look similar to the tabletop, which has not been painted. Now to add the noise or the grain layer, all you have to do is create a new layer. I'll call it noise. Use the previous layer as a clipping mask, and then you have to change the blend mode to overlay. When you do that, this option becomes available. Fill with overlay neutral color 50% gray. Say OK. Now you can't see this layer because it's on overlay. If this was on normal, you would see it. It looks like this. But I'm going to leave it on overlay. So even though you can't see the layer, you can add effects to it. In this case, we're going to add noise to it. So I'll go up to Filter, Noise, Add Noise. In this case, I want it to be monochromatic. I don't want it to be really colorful. You can add more noise or less noise, but you can't change the size of the noise in this particular interface. This is a legacy feature and it's fairly limited. You could experiment to see which one of these works better for you. In this case, I think the uniform is working a little bit better. So I'll say OK. You need to soften or knock off the edges of those pixels a little bit. So I'm going to add a blur, a Gaussian blur of just, say, 1 pixel. Say OK. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity to about 60% or so. You do want the table group to act as a clipping mask for this layer. We don't want this noise to affect the rest of the image. We only want it to appear where it is overlapping the painted layers. So we achieve that by making it a clipping mask. This one happens to already have the clipping mask relationship set up because I put it in between the noise layer that I created previously. So you can option click between the layer to create the clipping mask, or you can go to the drop-down menu, and here you can create, or in this case, release the clipping mask. But that's pretty important because we don't want to add grain to the rest of the image, only to the painted layers. Next, I worked on the floor to lighten it up and make it feel integrated with the sky outside. So there's quite a few layers here. I'm just going to go through them and turn them on, and you can see what's going on. This is a reflection really on the little side table and some retouching on the right side of the floor here. This whole group, again, is for the right side. This one lightens up the carpet a little bit. I've got a chunk of carpet here that I use to kind of expand the carpet and lighten it up a little bit. There's a little patch on the floor. And then I've got this group up here that additionally lights up the floor. Next, I added seams to the window and a reflection of the table lamp in the glass. The chandelier was a bit of a challenge. It was shot in a different location in the showroom, and there was a guy standing on a table holding up black velvet behind the chandelier so that I could easily key out the background and composite the chandelier in the new composition. In order to create the real sparkly look of the chandelier, I used a legacy brush called Starburst Small and individual dabs of paint, and this would create a glint on the crystals. The only important thing with that is to make sure you don't overdo it. I also added another group just to punch up the contrast to make the crystals stronger. We had to have a reflection in the window and a reflection on the floor. I decided to add a shadow to the left side to bring your attention into the center of the image. And I decided to give it an overall adjustment layer to move it towards blue. I felt that integrated it better with the background outside, the city lights. It also made the sofas look whiter and brighter. I added a shadow on foreground, again to focus your attention towards the center of the image. Next, I brought in the model and the chair, and I just did some simple retouching on the model to separate her from the background, help her stand out a little bit. So that's what these layers are over here. A highlight on her front of her leg, the side of her face and her arm, and a highlight on the back of her head. As well as another adjustment layer at the very top of the layer stack to brighten the whole image even more. So working this way, I did end up with a lot of layers, but that's good news because that gives me the flexibility to try different things. If everything's on a separate layer, I can modify the opacity, the blend mode. I can delete it, move it to a different position. Working this way just gives you a lot of options for creative exploration and to make changes. And here's what the final layers panel looks like. And once again, this was the original. And this is my retouched composite.